Let's talk a little bit on open banking. Now, open banking is still relatively new. It's a new term, but everybody's trying to employ it and deploy it. And it's going to create some challenges, yet it's going to create a lot of opportunity. How do we get this whole process going? I mean, if I was to stop for 1 second and think, people or countries or certain banks have been able to initiate this, and some are struggling. First piece of advice for the industry would be what? Guillaume, let me start with you, sir. What's your take on this?
Interesting you start with me because I'm on corporate banking, but because open banking typically refers to the liberation of customer data on accounts. In an open banking world, customer can delegate access to their account to third parties, so they can read their data or perform operation on their behalf. I don't think in corporate banking we're there yet, and I'm not sure we'll get there. The way open banking is done in corporate banking is with marketplaces. Banks are starting to share the data on marketplaces. So, for instance, you have marketplaces for financing and hedging trade finance. So, for instance, a corporate want to discount an LC, then they can ask different financial institutions on these marketplaces, and the banks will bid for it. So it means our clients are sharing their data on the platform, and we are sharing our bid offer on the platform as well. What's interesting is that in Singapore, we have an example of the corporate loan market as well, which is drastically changing. As you may know, we have new regulation. Our bank risk appetite. You have also new non-banking lending partners. You have market fragmentation. You have globalization. So it's difficult for banks with legacy infrastructure and chasing cost saving to fit this new market paradigm. So to cope with this, we support a startup in Singapore that is setting up a digital platform for primary transaction and secondary trading of corporate loans. And by sharing the data, you enable the buy and sell side from both banks and non-banks to meet and to do matchmaking. So I think that's very interesting, and that's how all the corporate banks are going to enter the open banking. But the open banking, to go further, having third parties acting on our behalf, I think it will come with the regulation, a little bit like a PSD2 in Europe, or even, there is a start with Singapore with the API playbook, but it's coming.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Janina, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think similar to Guillaume, right? I think open banking is definitely more targeted for retail, I think, as a starting place. With the API marketplace, I think what one can do is say, if I'm a UOB customer, as soon as I log into my app, right, it might actually prompt me, do you actually want to port your data from other financial institutions? So if I have other banks, I might choose to do so and then have that data ported. I think by forcing that, or like enabling that, the government is trying to sort of even out the playing field so that there is a little bit more competition, and I think it encourages the innovations as well. Once all that information is being traded, then the key is which bank able to harness all that information to actually being able to then offer a value add, which other banks hasn't, right? It's actually trying to understand your customer needs much better than before by harnessing all this data. So I think the race is only started with the open banking, because open banking, things like API marketplace is just going to open the door, but it's more like what informations and what can you make out of the information, which will be game changer, I think.
Interesting. So Pranava, from your take, do you see this entire shift moving in favor of open banking more than what we currently have and the conventional way of doing things? Because do you think it really helps the consumer at the end of the day? Because that's what it's all about. And the reason I went to Guillaume first is because I think corporate follows this chain quite heavily, but I'm just curious to see where it sits. So what's your take on that?
I think it definitely helps the consumer when there's an open API marketplace and third-party providers in fintechs and others who come into play. But that market, as I also previously said in our conversation, is very limited to a certain activity, even on the retail side of it. So it is not like it's going to be for the entire retail activity that the person does, right? So even today, if you see, there are a lot of APIs and there are even APIs which is being used. For example, Microsoft Money has an API with Plaid. Plaid was bought over by Visa, right, which does an API to collect all your account information from different US banks, and you can get it into your Microsoft Money, now even on Excel, right? That's probably a starting point that we see, where you can manage all your finances, accounts, and everything. And similarly, there are other APIs which is being provided for retail in terms of payment space, in terms of cross-border transactions, in terms of even accumulating your invoice billings and other activities that the retail customer does. But it wouldn't completely shift in terms of how a retail customer would work towards a particular bank or have a relationship with a particular bank, right? Because there is something else beyond just an API and a transaction that comes with every bank in which a customer works. I might sound too philosophical here, but though being a technologist in the background, but technology enables certain aspects of it, but the trust in the institutions where the retail customer belongs to is very, very essential in terms of how it works. Open API definitely has the capability to change the entire landscape in terms of how it works. But whether it's really profitable for all the companies to share all data or certain parts of data, that's what we need to see as it comes along, right? So
Interesting. And that's
not sure if I answered, but
you did. No, you did. You really did,
right?
because you teed this up very, very well for me to go to Binru and say, hey, you're right. You mentioned fintech. You mentioned, what? The technology is the enabler. Binru, explain how this all fits in together. What's the glue around this entire picture that we're seeing in open banking?
Mm, from a technology point of view, it's extremely hard to govern the risk for a bank, right? To open up their APIs. And the difficulty is not with the tech layer for the bank. The difficulty is governing the third party fintechs that's going to use these APIs. Yes, the rule currently encourages the banks to open up their API, but ultimately still holds the bank accountable in the event that the data of the customer is lost due to a third party integration. So nobody will sue a small fintech if you lost information. You will sue the bank that opened up this API. And the only thing that the bank gets in return for doing this is white innovation. They actually don't get any data back for intelligence. They will share the data. The banks hardly get any data back. And so the motivation to do so just to foster innovation is actually on the low side. Most banks want to grow these innovations within the bank itself, right? So it's just like you want to build your own PayLah and you want to make sure that the PayLah then gets done everything. But external innovations is partly a motivation. And you can see this in Europe, whereby they started open banking for the last 2 years. It has failed to gain a lot of traction simply because it's just relatively lopsided from an interest, from an ROI perspective for the bank. And even though Europe mandated it, still the pickup is slow. The education to the end user is also very important. If you pick anyone on the streets of Europe and ask them if they know open banking, a big portion will tell you they don't know, because they don't know that they are using the innovation of a third party vendor, and how this opens up to their data, or how they through this third party vendors app give their access of their banking data to this third party. So I think general education is still in the early stage. It has potential though to do more with the Singapore digital banks. And the Singapore MAS is very smart to encourage the digital bank to go fully open API from day one. and they have little to lose because they have no clients, no historical clients, so they have little to lose for opening up their API, and they immediately will get a lot of innovation from other tech companies. So I think this will make a shift once we have the new licenses.
Interesting. No, thank you for that. Yes, Pranava, you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add to what Bindu just rightly summarized, right? I mean, the digital banks which come with a clean playground, they can have APIs or whatever, right? Singtel or Grab, these guys can do APIs to see what money they can make out of it. But for the banks to actually expose and open up, there is no real return on investments for that. And also the key part of everything again goes back to not technology, because technology is there to support a lot of things. I mean, you can build a complete thing of integrating a lot of applications or across different geographies and everything even today. It's more about how the trust is enabled and whether my asset is serviced correctly and whether it is safe with a particular institution or an organization, right? So that's probably the key thing as well, apart from technology.
No, absolutely.
And if I can also add that, with the impending potential recession that's coming, a lot of banks knows that fintech is going to consolidate. Opening up your APIs right now, you have no control of who's going to build what. And the moment you have a recession coming, the end users is going to suffer. Your happy customers who had a service is going to lose their service suddenly. And they may not blame the third party. They might go back to DBS and OCBC and say, what happened to this?
That's correct.
I think it's very true that with recession coming, even with the virtual banking license, right, in terms of the uptake and the mood as well, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there's a shift in terms of even the level of enthusiasm pre and post this pandemic. So we'll see and watch this space, I suppose.